Hello, brilliant and embodied souls. Welcome to my channel. My name is Kim. Thanks for joining me. We are going to be looking at the Deleted World Tarot. This is a new deck into my collection. It was a Kickstarter campaign that recently found its way to me about 2-ish or so weeks ago. The deck is a intellectual miasma, which is why I really wanted to provide a review of the deck. I purchased this deck on my own, Kickstarter campaign, and I have not looked at other reviews or unboxings of this deck. So it's really, what I'm about to share is really my own experience, uninfluenced by the thoughts and opinions of others. That's not really typically how I bring decks into my collection. I am somebody who really enjoys doing research and checking out walkthroughs, getting a handle on who the creator is, what their story is, and if it's a tarot deck, what their experiences are with the tarot. I have a preference for creators knowing the tarot when they make a tarot. And yet, I do have decks in my collection that, that may not necessarily be the case, and they're still wonderful. Let's get into this deck specifically. I'm going to start with the production, then we'll look at the cards, then we'll look at the guidebook. The deck comes in a lovely box. There's gold embossing on the box. You have a lovely little white book that is more than a little white book, and yet it's succinct. It gives you what you need to. Again, we'll circle back to that a little bit later. The deck itself is on a lovely bendy linen cardstock. It is a delight in the hands. Very fun to shuffle. This is some of my favorite cardstock. Now that we've gotten some of the production value out of the way, let's talk about the premise of this deck. And I'll start to show you some cards while I talk about the premise. This deck comes from an alternative reality or a parallel reality to our own. And that does seem to actually be the creator's intention. The Kickstarter campaign was very fun. The wording in the little white book is very fun in the sense that it sets the deck up as a portal into this deleted world, which is a world that subsists or is connected to internet culture and technology culture. That premise is one reason why I backed the deck. I'm finding myself in a lot of existential dread about the role of technology in our lives, more specifically, the role of AI in our lives. I'm somebody who is skeptical about AI, and my thought process in backing the deck was maybe this deck can help me work with some of those thoughts, some of those feelings, and transcend them or transmute them. I'm not sure if that hope is going to be realized. I've simply been using the deck as a daily draw to get to know it. And maybe I will be able to do a quick addendum to this video at a later date to report on whether it's going, whether it has helped me with some of that existential dread. The artwork itself is collage. I'm unclear if it's digital collage. I don't think it's analog. I'm also unclear if AI was used in the creation of this deck. what I can say is that the art is at times very, there is an emotive quality to the art. And there's also a real intelligence and intellectual nature to the deck, which makes sense given what I said about its premise, its theme. The suits have been renamed, and there's a lot of renaming in this deck. The court cards have been totally renamed and seem to have the gender of the court cards removed, with the exception of there's like a little figurine. Here's a great example. There is like these little boxes contain information about the card. There's a little representation, a little chess piece representation. But beyond that, that reference to chess, there's no gendering, or very, very little gendering in the deck, which is something I really appreciate. To my knowledge, the creator identifies as queer, and supporting queer artists is very, very important to me. Having decks that don't have gender within them is also really exciting, and something not that I search for it. I identify as she, her. But again, like in reading for other people, I want to have a wide variety of decks that could potentially resonate with a wide variety of folks. And I read for queer folks. And that's a value of mine. So that's exciting. That's one exciting thing about the deck. The other exciting thing is that you do, so this is the Tower card, you do get the traditional, I assume, Golden Dawn. So this is where, I'll talk a little bit about my own practice for just a second. I'm not somebody who is really into the Golden Dawn astrological associations for cards. That is a layer I sometimes pay attention to, but generally I don't. If that is something that you're into, this deck has that. Getting back to the artwork, the titles and keywords are onto themselves. This deck is a deck onto itself. There's, again, lots of renaming, not just of the courts and the suits. Many of the majors have also been renamed. So the keywords and titles are extremely helpful. I don't tend to read with reversals. This deck, oh dear, I'll get it later. This deck is I'm going to read it with reversals. The keywords in reverse are really fascinating. I'm about the reversals with this deck. And there are reverse meanings in the guidebook. Let's talk a little bit about what I am struggling with in terms of this deck, and then I'll get to what I'm really enjoying. Per what I said about renamings, some of the renamings are downright confusing and a touch frustrating. I've pulled out a couple of cards to illustrate what I'm talking about. Here we have what would be the Emperor. We don't have a gender, great, but we have the clouds, and the iconography on this deck, the coloration of this deck, this card, does not say Emperor to me. This deck goes its own way completely, and that is represented very well in the Emperor card. aka the clouds. When I looked at the guidebook, there are, there is a emperor quality reference in the guidebook and not. So this card confuses me. Next, let's go to strength and justice. These are the cards that, are, 8 and 11 respectively. This one, looks a little bit more like strength to me. This does not say justice. We've got the physical world reversed, the world made physical. And then, what's supposed to be justice is force of nature. And then we've got force of machine. And when I've read the description, more so for the justice card, it doesn't really speak of justice whatsoever. So in going its own way, there are certain tarot archetypes that feel missing to me. And maybe in this parallel universe, that's actually okay. And the idea that, for instance, justice is missing from this dimension may be on purpose. If we think about internet culture, is there justice happening? Question mark. We have cancel culture, but is that justice? I have a lot of thoughts and feelings on cancel culture. As a psychotherapist, I understand wanting to create boundaries with certain types of individuals, certain types of content. And yet I also know people who have been canceled and there's great psychological harm that is done. I also know that some of those campaigns feel a bit like mob mentality in certain instances. In other instances, they may well be warranted, and that's the only form of justice people can get. Complicated, very complicated. Beyond justice and strength, there is temperance, or, astrologically what we maybe would see as temperance. But again, that energy is not here. And so we have the virtual world and the world invented in the reversed. And in reading the guidebook, let's just take a look at the guidebook for temperance, which is my birth card. Or my, it's a card for Sagittarius. I'm a Sagittarius in tropical astrology. Okay, the virtual world. The virtual world card signifies exploration and expansion. Okay. The artwork, a digital distortion of natural elements, reflects the merging of reality and illusion. It represents the vast potential and boundless opportunities of a digital realm. This is the second of the three worlds and embodies the archetype of infinite potential in worlds yet to be invented. After death and rebirth, we begin the journey into new dimensions, the quest for higher knowledge and speculative futures. Then we have the upright and reversed meanings. I will leave those for your discovery if you choose to purchase this deck. As you can see, the deck really goes its own way. As I've said, and I have a lot of decks in my collection that go their own way. I don't have a problem with studying a deck, getting to know a deck. I'm ambivalent about some of the changes within this particular deck. I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time with it. What I can tell you is it's not a fast read because of these changes. A person, I have had to slow down. I would expect other people will probably have to slow down when working with this deck, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. The one card that I really have a problem with is this one, Extinction for the Star. There's not a lot of hope in this deck, which is maybe why, again, the star card has been renamed as Extinction. Ugh. This deck is meeting me in some of my feelings about where we're headed as a hyper technological society that has forgotten our connection with the earth. This deck really points at what humans are doing to the planet. And calls that into question without being abrasive and hostile. I think that this deck is very successful at making a person think, helping me think about some of the questions I have had. The final card will be a nice transition into what I really enjoy about this deck, the Deleted World. This is the World card. And I am enjoying the concept of this deck. For some of the reasons I just mentioned, it's asking me to question myself, some of my behaviors and actions. It's helping me think about the tarot in a new and different way. It does not have gender within it. There's a very modern and relevant aspect to this deck, which I find very successful. Let's talk a little bit about how it has read for me in the daily draws. It's been really spot on. Once I take my time, and I do have to read the guidebook. But when I take my time and do so, the messages have been really spot on. So I'll give you an example. Today I pulled the three of what would be the Three of Wands. It is, of course, renamed. The suits are renamed. Going back to like a small critique, the renaming of the suits just flies out of my head. The suits here, let me bear with me as I find it. Okay, we've got the Order of Components. I think that's Pentacles or Earth. The Order of Glitches. Don't remember. The Order of Illusions, also don't remember. And the Order of Pixels, also don't remember. You can kind of see my conundrum here. Other than the Order of Components, the renamings don't carry for me the associations of the particular suits, which makes the renamings difficult for me. Anyway, back to how it reads. I pulled the Three of Wands, Three of Fire, and one of the key words was productivity, that's upright, and in reverse, negligence. I got reversed negligence in the challenge position of my daily draw. What do I do today? I put my earbuds into the washing machine. Negligence, right? So this deck has a cheeky attitude, and it reads really spot on. However, you have to take your time and really get to know the deck, look at the guidebook, sit with some of the imagery. In terms of a personality, I've already maybe alluded to it, but this deck is for sure a chaos magician. And maybe a touch, it's a whimsical chaos magician, a very intellectual chaos magician. And yet a chaos magician with a heart, with an interest in asking helpful and thoughtful questions about the world we live in and this parallel universe. Its personality is a bit confounding. It's not, you know, if this deck was a person, I would be having very intellectual conversations. There would be maybe some discussion of relationships, like some talking about, you know, how we feel personally about our families and maybe things like that. But this deck is a very philosophical deck. It would want to talk about Nietzsche. This deck is very Nietzschean. Did I say that right? I think I'll leave it at that. It's not going to be a deck for everybody. And on first impression, I wasn't sure it would be a deck for me. And yet the more I work with it, the more familiar I become with the deck, the more I'm convinced it has a place in my collection. The last thing I'll say about its intellectual nature leads me to comparing it to, say, a Thoth deck. The Thoth is also a very intellectual deck for me, and I love it for that. And yet, sometimes that is a disadvantage. I do feel that way about this deck, that its intellectualism is sometimes a disadvantage. That said, as compared to, say, a Thoth deck, this deck is so modern, so relevant, so needed. It's unique. I can't think of a deck that I've seen that remotely compares to this deck. That feels like the place to end this review. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Leave me a comment, like, subscribe, you know, all that good stuff. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.